That should cure it right there. All right. Thanks for the help. All right, let's see. Now, check to see if the comments go back out. Oh, wow, it did comment there. I wonder if it commented in, man, this is neat. Oh, that is so cool. The text chat, I can just chat in one place and it goes to both places simultaneously. I wonder if there's a way to show them both on the screen. Thank you. Oh, this is so neat. This is working good. Yeah. All right. Thank you. I don't know how to pronounce your name, so Manito? I don't know. We'll try one part of it. All right. So now what I need to do is come up with some sort of. Is the audio coming through on both of on Twitch? Because I have someone who's checked it on YouTube. So now I need to make some sort of little banner or something that shows that I am taking questions as like the main thing that I'm doing here. Cool. I wonder if it's recording also. It's probably, I guess it is recording automatically on YouTube. Is that how that works? Pretty sure it does. Yes, I'm answering all questions about reality, period, whatever it is. This is my entertainment stream I'm going to start doing, so that and hopefully I can turn it into a Q&A, but that's going to require that people actually ask questions. So I'll have to have that. Thank you very much. Yeah, this is the first time I've just started up my streaming software. Never tried to do it this way. Yeah, it's doing both at the same time. I'm not, dressed up or anything, and have usually I kind of do like a little dress up for having a character that makes it edutainment. But otherwise, I'm just starting it up, checking it out, and wow, it went off without a hitch first time. That's I'm impressed. Usually, technology is not that nice. It usually just doesn't work. All right, so now I just need to come up with an image that will tell people what it is that I am doing. I guess I could do that kind of offline, but I wonder how quickly, like as a first time streaming, how quick. So how did you, Nagashima Manito? Is that right? I don't know. How did you end up getting shown to this channel? Like it came up really quickly. No, I am not familiar with that name. Thank you, Aaron. Yes, Entertainment. Yeah, I'm not familiar with that. So you know what I can do is while I'm waiting for responses and chat to come in, I can actually work on the image that'll say what it is that I'm doing, so people will know. So let me pop out the old Photoshop here and see if I can remain somewhat entertaining. Oh, really? Okay, that's neat. That's very cool. Okay. Yeah, basically what I'm wanting to start doing on a regular basis is do question and answer shows, and kind of with a fun little flair as a character, where my character is I am from the future. Ask me anything, and I'm going to stay with that character. Right now, I just broke character. My apologies. I'm going to have to delete this video because I'm breaking character. So, but from all the future streams, that is going to be, who I am. I am from the future, and I will answer all your questions. All right. Let's see here. All right. Let's see if I can be entertaining while opening Photoshop. I don't think I can. I think that's asking too much. I don't even know where to start here for what I should make it look like. I guess I just like make a little, create a new image. going to be stare at me while I try to make images stream. Very entertaining. Guess I need a 1920 by 1080. And I do a little stuff here. Check back in with the broadcast on occasion. Has done some great work with Ether Physics, Open Systems, etc. Oh, cool. Yeah, I've been sort of working independently for a long time. Not really relying on anybody's work other than the original sources. In other words, going back to Fresnel and then up through for Ether Physics, one of the most important contributors, actually. Well, Kelvin's probably the single most central important figure in Ether Physics, but McCulloch is actually who got a few different people moving forward in a certain direction that ended up leading to relativity, etc. So, like for instance, one of the ways in which general relativity is based in ether physics is that the Hilbert program for general relativity. So at the same time that Einstein was coming out with all of his papers on general relativity in 1950, he was working very closely with Hilbert, and Hilbert had basically for over a decade, Einstein made like no progress on, he made some progress, but it was very, very slow and not much changed with general relativity from, 1907 to, 1915, no matter who he worked with, until suddenly he reaches, he meets with Hilbert, and suddenly he stops talking to anybody else. Einstein stops corresponding with anybody but Hilbert, and they're corresponding basically daily, and then there's a flurry of papers comes out from Einstein at this point, and that's why a lot of people actually at the time wanted to credit Hilbert for general relativity, because basically Hilbert really gave Einstein a lot of his ideas for the advancement of general relativity. So, and his work comes from Mee's four-dimensional treatment of McCullough's ether, and so it's one of the reasons why in 1920 Einstein said that a space without ether is unthinkable, because of the fact that it is an ether theory. It is a preferred frame theory, and a lot of people don't really understand that over and over and over, Einstein talked about we have to abandon constancy. I've got like 5 or so different quotes where he says we have to, constancy is not valid. General relativity and constancy, don't mix. Constancy has to be given up. Over and over and over, he says this about light speed constancy. Yet today, everybody's still taught light speed constancy like it's fine, and also general relativity. They're incompatible. So anyway, so I don't really work with any new sources of ether physics, because I developed everything on my own. On my own as in like using what was developed during the 19th century through a variety of sources. So there were a lot of people working with Fitzgerald specifically, is who resurrected McCullough's work. So this was like around 1880, around the 1880s, that Fitzgerald kind of rediscovered McCullough's work, and Fitzgerald was the first one, and it's only been recently discovered. There's this little publication in a paper, it's the first version of special relativity's smallest form, I suppose, was publicized by Fitzgerald, and so it's the change factor, and that was, so a lot of times I thought that it was actually coming from Larmor was the first, but Larmor worked with Fitzgerald, got it from Fitzgerald, and then Lorentz expanded upon Larmor's work, which was an expansion upon Fitzgerald's work, which Fitzgerald basically got from his resurrection of McCullough. So all of this, there's this history of ether theory, and then when you go and you read all of the various authors during the 19th century on the advancement of ether theory, there are various commonalities that are crucial to understand. But then, who really kind of buttoned everything up was Kelvin. So Lord Kelvin was the person who made it work in a way that is physically reasonable. And he did that in 1889, and that's 2 years after the Michelson-Morley experiment. And so everybody was flipping out over the Michelson-Morley experiment because they didn't really understand exactly what was going on there. But it was right at that time that he finalized the work, some work he'd been doing in ether physics for 20 years. So, and it at the same time, Maxwell's equations were kind of running into some problems with what they thought of as pseudo-physicality. In other words, when they first started entertaining the idea of fields as just this abstraction with no real physical reality that's connected to. And so that's one of the reasons why people were kind of like, what these weird behaviors you're getting out of nowhere. You're just pulling numbers out of the air. And that was just completely unacceptable to scientists during that era. And so basically, Kelvin's 1889 paper is what a lot of people at that time felt like shored up Maxwell's equations, and that whole there's the Maxwellians, a group of people who were promoting Maxwell's work, and kind of shored all that up. So, yeah, most of my reading is 19th century. I don't read authors on ether physics past the Kasserat brothers in 1909. Beyond that, I mean, okay, there's a little bit from Madelung and from who's some of the other people who contributed to quantum physics. De Broglie, those people. So, fundamental authors in physics from 19th century to the advent of quantum physics is where I generally read. So, I mean, if he's an older author that I missed, I don't know. I might have just missed it. Just hasn't seemed to have come up specifically in the context that I'm working on. All right, let's see here. I need to. Ooh, this is a good font. I like that though. Accidentally, my keyboard messes me up a lot here, so I ended up typing something funny. Let's add some effects to that. right, let's see. Yeah, I figured it sounded like it was somebody a bit more recent. There's so many. One of the things that's been happening in as time goes on, we're having the thing of the singularity. I don't know if you've been on my channel and saw my interview with Jess Brewer, but one of the things he was talking about is that there's too much, and that is true. What we've got is lots and lots of people coming up with more and more and more ideas, and while we're attempting to be more open-minded about things, we're trying to look at as many alternatives as possible, especially with, like, most recently, there's yet another thing that came out from the LHC saying the standard model is trash, and then there's a bunch of other things that keep pointing out how modern theoretical physics is failing over and over and over, and has been for 20 years, and nobody really seems to be paying much attention. But even though it's just like, oh, this is different than the past 40 or 50 different announcements that the standard model is going wrong in these other ways. We're not going to add those all up and say maybe we need revolution. Instead, we'll just say, well, this is just one thing, and we'll have some way of fixing it. But anyway, there's just been so many of those that have come out. What was I even saying? My head is pounding, unfortunately. I was trying to get this done really quickly, and so I'm losing my train of thought here. I normally don't go on without like an energy drink in hand to help with headaches, etc. But I ended up starting the stream with a headache and a little feeling a little off. Maybe the chat. Yeah, he was saying it was more recent, and it's what is this show? Oh my God, that is so cool! That is so cool.
Because that's the service.
Oh, that is the best! I can actually show that you said something, so I can sit there and
respond to the comment.
I can,
especially for super chat.
I love this. This is so great. Okay. Okay. So that's what we were talking about. Wow, I love this software. This makes me happy.
See why everyone's using it?
Yep, yeah, I see exactly why everyone's using it. So simple, straightforward, easy.
Streamer's best friend.
Yeah, really is. All right, I gotta center this better. Why is this so hard to center? Come on, Photoshop. I know you can do this.
ASMR.
Thank you for the ASMR. That's great.
Now you need to download this one thing, and you can have like an avatar of yourself be all Prince Disney-fied.
Okay, sure, I'll do it.
Yeah.
I'll be Princess Disney-fied.
You know that app that I send you things on?
Yeah. Okay.
It's like that. It's that camera instead of the chat.
Oh, here we go. I actually will do this.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Instead of the thing chat, it's the thing camera. So just like
nice. Okay. Now I can actually save this. I'll put a little thing here on over. Let's see if the overlay will work. Thanks for joining me, by the way, and give me something to talk about while I'm working on all this. But wow, is my head pounding. Hey, babe, could you grab me a couple of aspirin? I would love you forever. Save this as. It's not too late for caffeine, is it? Might actually need some. Otherwise, this headache could take a turn for the worse.
regardless if it is or regardless if it is or isn't, you need it.
Yes, I do.
More ASMR.
Thank you. Yes, that's lots of ASMR. I'm sure that was loud as it could possibly be. Well, now everybody's going to have to go to the bathroom. What do I need to put this under? Steampunk. Yes, there we go. Love it. There we go. Save it there. Okay. Export. Yes. All right. Now. Oh man. Let's see. Yeah. The simplification is always a problem. In other words, mathematically speaking, simplification actually doesn't simplify things. It makes it more complex because there's more abstraction. E equals mc squared. What does that mean? Well, you have all these symbols that are dependent upon other symbols and dependent upon these other axioms, and you have just axioms and dependencies that just stretch out over so many different things that, though you have this one way of calculating it that is reliable because you have the system set up beforehand, that's great. But the connection between what is symbolized, by those symbols can become in more complex topics, you can end up losing a little connection between reality and what you're trying to symbolize with your abstraction, whether it was basically, because that's what math is. It's a modeling language. You're modeling something. So just the same as if you represent something with a computer program, when you're representing something with math, you are attempting to represent something. Math doesn't exist on its own, outside of reality. It's a representation. So when oh man, I can't remember anybody's names right now. Who was it who simplified Maxwell's equations? It was, starts with a D. Oh, I can't remember his name. Anyway, so the simplification of Maxwell's equations, when you read Maxwell's original papers, he goes into great lengths to set up a mechanical system. Why does he do this? Because you need to have a reason for why things do what they do. A wave without a medium is by itself an absurdity, but there's 100 years of tradition now in us just accepting superstitious absurdities. And so, yeah, that's, I think we definitely lost something. And that was one of the first places. It's not the time. At the time, everybody knew that, his simplifying of Maxwell's equations was a good thing. It's useful because basically you've got all this, kind of a mess. And if you're wanting to use something, it's just like when you're building on something, you don't want to have to rebuild your nail gun. Like, for instance, you don't want to have to get in there and tinker with your nail gun every time you're trying to build a house. That would be ridiculous. So if you're tinkering with your nail gun while you're trying to build, there's something wrong with the nail gun. And so that was kind of true of Maxwell's equations, is he built the first one, the first nail gun. It's like, it's an extremely valuable tool, but it's kind of a, kludge in the way it's put together, but it accomplishes something in a reliable fashion, and it was a new way of doing things. So that's that. But then, being able to simplify it basically means it's more streamlined. So you don't have to worry about it anymore and start doing something based on it, something that it requires it to be there and useful and easy. And so that's why the simplification is a good thing, but also loses something. It's both simultaneously. Heavy side. Thank you. Yes. I don't know why right now, head is absolutely pounding. Actually, I might want to add some ibuprofen to that aspirin, if you don't mind, because this is quickly turning into a migraine. So how are you introduced to a lot of these various topics? Like, I know there's a few different groups out there who are interested in ether physics, and there's what was one of the groups that I met way early on? It was the Natural Philosophy Society, something like that, I think it was the name of it. And I met them way back when I first launched my site, 15, 20 years ago. Hello. Oh, yeah, cool. Mm-hmm. She's trying to get me to look at the camera. I can put my camera over there. I think they'll be all right with me staring down at the screen a little bit. It's fine. It's fine. They'll just know I stare down at the screen a lot.
It's great. It's interactive.
Not ordinary in games. Does that mean you're extraordinary in games? Or you're just an aberration in games? Oh yeah. Let's see. I can go ahead and do that. Yeah, I can put that's so neat to be able to put the comments up. I love that. I don't know. It's such a simple thing, but I love it that both streams are simultaneously in one place, and it's just neat. Oh, that's right. I forgot I was doing something. Let me add my overlay. I have an overlay, so people will know what it is. So yeah, having nothing to contribute, if you have questions, you have something to contribute, because that's actually what I need is questions. That's what this is. I'm going to try to do this as a question thing. So I'm gonna, in the future, it'll be like as a character kind of thing. And where is the thing I just made? It's not here. That's the wrong place. One of the interesting things that I found in the history of physics is I'm actually there's kind of this karma in physics that is Alexander Graham Bell actually funded the 1887 Michelson experiment, and Bell basically stole a invention of one of my ancestors, the telephone. Which is kind of a well-known thing that Antonio Meucci is who invented the telephone. Let's see, where is? At some point, I'll do all that. I'll get it all done. It's a GIF. Is it showing GIFs? Oh, I can overlay GIFs. Okay, that's true. But where is the thing I just made? This is physics, not steampunk. No wonder. Okay, juggling, trying to like be entertaining and also get something done. It's harder than it seems. All right, let's see. Will this work? Awesome. I love the deepness here, man. It's like just no practical purpose. Let's see, there's a practical purpose in gathering experience. It's here for the sake of fun. Fun itself, it serves the human soul. Borderlands Sciences Foundation. Eric Dollard, some others. Oh, that's right. Eric Dollard, he actually kind of appeared after I put up the anti-relativity page. And some of the things that he was saying seemed to kind of resonate with what was going on that website so many years ago. So that's interesting. At this point, I'm trying to not talk about the anti-relativity site much, because I want people to understand the idea that relativity is not the problem. It's what people understand about relativity. In other words, Einstein's version of relativity is not the version of relativity that we have. And that's what people really don't understand, is that he constantly talked about constancy being a problem. And there's the tea is ready, the kettle. There was a recent video that was a huge. I mean, I've been working on this for so many years, and to try to get it more widely known that there is a specific issue we need to deal with, and that is specifically constancy. And the idea of constancy comes from an oversimplification. So Einstein was attempting to just add the electromagnetism part to Lorentz's kinematics. So Lorentz had worked on this, the shortening and the time change, all of those things that the Lorentz factor relates to. Einstein wasn't worried about that. He's like, okay, that's cool. I'll import that, and then moving forward, you don't have to worry about the ether, though. In my theory, you don't even have to think about it. Just this is the electromagnetism, and you can just kind of forget about the ether for the moment, because at the time he wasn't saying to reject the ether. He was saying to just don't worry about it. You don't need it to calculate. You don't need to know where you are in the ether. There's this neat thing where you don't need to know where you are, because it's automatically going to handle it in the background. And so don't worry about that. And then that basically turned into the idea of constancy through Hermann Minkowski. Minkowski was Einstein's mentor, put out a paper in 1907, died in 1909, I think. And so when he first put out his paper, Einstein said, now that the mathematicians have invented the theory of relativity, I don't understand it myself anymore. He was talking about Minkowski, his mentor. However, he died, and people jumped Einstein's case publicly in various journals. And so he kind of had to back out of that a little bit and adopt Minkowski's work, because Minkowski's work was a representation of something about relativity that was useful in a way. The constancy concept actually exists. It just exists as an illusion in Lorentz Poincaré ether. So in the ether, you can actually produce the idea of constancy in a completely mechanical and rational way. But there was just this confusion that happened around basically Minkowski's death. Everything's Minkowski's fault for dying, bastard. He died early, and he was like friends with everybody. He was best friends with Hilbert, for instance, and they were about to. Hilbert was setting up a meeting between Poincaré and Minkowski, and then Poincaré wasn't able to make it, and then Minkowski just died. It was appendicitis or something very abrupt that he just killed him out of nowhere, and it was kind of early. He was like 40 something. I don't know. He was pretty young. I'm gonna have to look that up. I'm not familiar with the Einstein-Velikovsky. Well, actually, that sounds familiar though. It might be. I'm not realize it. Sometimes I forget names. Okay, let's have this. Yeah, I'm just not. It seems like I recognize his face, and so I may have run into him. Ancient literary sources. Okay. Velikovsky. What is he most well known for? Focus. Okay, so it's called Pseudoscience by a lot of people, and hold on. Okay, yeah, there's some interesting stuff he had. What is he most well known for, though? I've heard a little bit about it, and I'm not very familiar with exactly what it is that he was talking about specifically. So, you know what? Let me put up my my little thing that I made. Did it finally upload? Yes, it did. Let's see. Bam! Yes. I have to change that color. The color it's hard to see. All right. Really? I had no idea. I do remember hearing something about that. That may be why I ran into it. That's why I'm familiar with his face. It sounds like it may be one of those ancient interpretations of things that kind of goes along with all of the stuff from Blavatsky, etc. If I were to guess, there's the ideas of interpreting the past based upon that. And this is the wrong one. Worlds in collision. Ah, I see. The electric universe movement. That's right. That's right. Okay, now it's starting to make sense. I forgot about the electric universe and the relationship between the Thunderbolts of the Gods and Velikovsky. Okay. Um, yeah, the electric universe model is interesting. Um, there are ways in which what I know about the way things work have a lot of crossover. Um, I don't know so much about so a lot of the ideas that they have about connecting various mythologies and ideas of like the planets having gargantuan lightning bolts etched in the surface and things like that. I don't know. It's just so enormously speculative that I think it's speculation a bit too far. But then again, there is a value to speculating very, very far into a theory and seeing what can come out of it. Just as long as you're aware how much of it is just purely speculation, that you kind of got to keep in that. This could all be completely wrong, categorization. It's like, yeah, entertaining. However, we need a tremendous amount of evidence for that to be all that useful. And that was one of the things that kind of brings us back to what I was talking about, where in one of my interviews on my YouTube channel, where I'm talking with Jess Brewer, that there's just too much. And that is, there's a lot of creativity out there. And one of the reasons why we like parsimony is because there is an infinite amount of ideas a person can come up with. There's an infinite amount of stuff to explore, and we don't have an infinite time. We don't have infinite resources to be able to explore every single idea that we come up with. We don't have infinite time to delineate what's valuable and what's worthless. And so when you start saving tremendous amount of information, basically you end up running into a problem of storage, categorization, searching, all those things that have to do with just data. As we grow more and more and more data on the internet, there's more and more noise drowning out the signal. And that's kind of what we have in a lot of these explorations that go so far afield that it gets into territory where it's just not valuable. In other words, you have to identify some way in which these ideas are valuable. What does it get us? What does it do for us? And that's why people always kind of focus on the engineering aspect of it. And it sounds like, oh, you just want to make gadgets and make money, and that's it. No. There's actually one of the reasons why we need to be able to engineer based on the principles that you come up with and things like that is because we need to know that there is something that will prove that there's some purpose to the narrative that you have, and some value and something that it'll give us in some way that'll be useful to you. Because basically, what is knowledge good for? If you ask yourself, what is knowledge for? There's kind of a oh yeah, I need to put this up, don't I? If you ask yourself, what is knowledge for? What's the purpose of having any knowledge? It's the way we ended up storing information as animals is because knowledge was useful to us. Is because there was some sort of pattern in reality that repeated itself. And so, whenever you kind of go through, everyone, in their adult life as they get older and after they've learned a lot, there should be a point in time in which you kind of doubt everything. And you can either come out the other side having rebuilt your knowledge from scratch and rebuilt your understanding of the world, or you can kind of lose touch with reality. And a lot of people just simply lose touch with reality. But some of those fundamental questions you have to ask if you start to get lost in solipsism or any of those sorts of things, which is kind of that dark night of the soul, kind of questioning everything in reality, questioning because all of your heroes have been proven wrong, all the authorities have been proven false, everything that you kind of based your whole idea of reality, all of those things start going wrong and false, and then any kind of trauma in your life, you can tend to stop believing in anything. And so there's kind of cogito ergo sum, and it's there's another version that I really like that somebody added. It was dubito ergo cogito ergo sum, and it's like it is I doubt, therefore I think, therefore I am, and it's a question of going down to what are the basics, what's information useful. Pretend you are a brain in a jar. Why do you need to any of your memories, any of your hi kitty? Why do you need any of those things? What are they good for? And the answer ends up being it serves your happiness and your function somehow in reality. So even if reality was completely an illusion, you're a brain in a jar, this is all just in your head, I'm in your head, everything's in your head. Even if you wanted to start there's a point at which you start seeing these commonalities to reality and how reality, first off, doesn't do what you tell it to, and but it does do things in a very reliable way. And so, being able to find those commonalities means that we have to have some way of paring things down. That's what I was getting at. And we have to find some way to pare it down. And that's why some of these ideas that are pseudoscience, there is good reason to discard pseudoscience, but there's also very good reason to make sure to look at and carefully examine and even retain some level of pseudoscience, because there are a variety of things that we learn through superstition. And that is like the example I give over and over and over is that there is this the spirit of the fishing tree in Papua New Guinea, where they go and they pray and they do their ritual, and when they do their ritual, the fish actually rise to the surface, they gather them, and they eat from this. So their belief in the spirit of the fishing tree is a truth, but it's a truth within limits, because what it is the root has a neurotoxin in it that isn't the root is what they're beating into the water as part of the ritual of honoring the spirit of the tree, and that ends up giving them fish. And so it's a replicable experiment, but what they've understood is a superstitious abstraction. And that's why we need to look at things that are superstitions, look at things that are abstractions, look at things that we call pseudoscience, because the truth of the matter is our current ideas of things are superstition as well. With the many ways in which we've been shown that all of our current theories are wrong shows that it's an abstraction. It is an analogy to the truth. It's not the factual truth. It's not what's really going on underneath the surface. And so in understanding that, we need to understand that there are other abstractions that are also truth within limits, and that we've been capturing those things for thousands of years. And in some cases, they may be much more true than we believe them to be, simply because we believe them to not be that, simply because they are superstitious in nature. Just because they're superstitious doesn't mean some truth was captured in an analogy. It's called actually ether would be called more of like a proto-science. The people will call everything pseudoscience if there's the slightest deviation from the mainstream. They'll call it pseudoscience because it's pejorative, because they're behaving in a religious manner and they attack anything that's outside of what they believe to be their group's canon. And you have to understand that human beings are very, very deeply religious in a certain way, and that is, religion is your connection to your group. Religious impulse is your connection to your group, and therefore it doesn't require that there be any idea of God in it, so long as you have a group and their ideas which you can defend as something that you hold as the truth and your identity and how you work with the world. And so whenever any idea comes along that is counter to orthodoxy, there are going to be people who, and like I said, has nothing to do with religion. They just simply are behaving in a religious manner in defending it. And so that's why they use the word pseudoscience, et cetera, as a pejorative, that they immediately try to attack anything that's even slightly different. But ether theory is it is what our current physics is based upon, even though there's so many people that have forgotten the history of physics, or have just never been taught it, or didn't learn it, or it just wasn't part of the program, because any honest survey of the history of physics will show that ether theory is directly responsible for modern physics. Yeah, that's engineering a new device isn't necessarily, it's a test. In other words, how do you use it? It doesn't even have to be a physical device that you use. If there is information that is useful to you, in other words, there are some ideas, some ways of thinking about things that can be useful to you specifically because it makes you happier. It makes you more capable of working with the world. I mean, think about it this way. Think of your brain like a computer that does things. Okay, there are, let's say it's a computer hooked up to a robot controlling it. There are programs in between, one set of programs meant to make the robot do things, and another set of programs that are directly like addressing the hardware. There are things in between. There are programs. And think of those as like ideas. And if you want to put that in something that's like, by the way, I'm very focused on taking spirituality and conveying it as in a very hard science, materialistic sort of way. Ooh, wow, my head is just pounding. My point is that there are things that go in between. And those ideas, if you think of it in that fashion, they serve a very real purpose. And so just the ideas themselves can help flesh out and make your whole overview of reality be more coherent and directly useful. So when I talk about the engineering principles behind things, can you engineer something and trying to shave things down to that level? That of course that reductionism does go too far. I mean that is part of a huge problem in science that I'm working kind of against. But yeah, this is a good comment here. Yes, there is so much of it that is they're not able to falsify it in certain ways, but they have been falsifying a lot of astrophysics just recently. There's been, the cosmological constant problem is partially related to it, but now there's this issue between standard candles and the cosmic microwave background. So there's two different ways in which they look at the way in which the age of the universe, and they're off by billions of years from each other. Both of them are based upon completely accepted science, and so there's a complete disconnect there. There's the vacuum energy catastrophe. There's they talk about, well, in the first 0.097 picoseconds of the Big Bang. It's like, no, just please stop. Please just stop it, because it's ridiculous the way in which they have this absolute ridiculous faith that is it's clearly just the bad part of religion. There's a good part of religion. There's a very good part of religion. There's also a very bad part as well, and that is the behaviors, the mental absolute acceptance of the group's ideas of things, from which you just simply move forward and never question. You never take a step back. You just continue moving forward from whatever group you respect, whatever their idea is. If you respect that group, then you believe in that group, and therefore you take on their ideas as something that's part of you. And that's kind of, we have to do that to a certain extent to be able to progress. I mean, you have to have a starting place to judge things by. It's just sometimes we get so stuck in one place, our one starting point, that you never leave the starting point. You just get stuck there and say, this is the truth, this is the ground truth forever. It's never changing. I'll defend it to the death, and anybody who dares say anything about changing it, well, they're attacking me, and that's that religious part that I'm talking about. That is religiosity. It's not spirituality. And so that's the idea of spirit and spirituality in religion is the good part of religion, in my opinion. It is the group behaviors that, not group behaviors altogether, but specific types of group behaviors that have to do with not being willing to change, not being willing to look at things from a multiplicity of views. That is the negative aspect of religiousness and spirituality. That it doesn't have anything to do with God, doesn't even have anything to do with spirituality. Planet orbits can be. Hold on, let me put this up on the screen. Planet orbits can be around a large star or stationary and polarly aligned with a smaller star. What? I mean, yeah, I definitely have some problems with EU, but it's one of those things where I hate to throw the baby out with the bathwater. So I think there's a baby in there. There's a whole lot of bathwater, but I think that they're onto some very important clues, and because a lot of things that they bring up are valid arguments, criticisms, and observations. Behaviors of plasmas, etc., are something that it's very critical to understanding the way in which the universe works, that we have kind of gotten away from because of this whole field idea and the anti-physicality of the shut up and calculate movement, and all of those things come from constancy of light. By the way, everything I'm going to say this probably if I do this podcast regularly, I will have said it thousands of times per year, that the constancy of light is the specific reason why everything broke. Everything in physics broke specifically because the idea of the constancy of light, which breaks physicality, which breaks the world behaving in a physical, mechanical, rational manner. Which is why Einstein rejected it. Which is why Einstein discarded it and said it so many times, and said that in 1920, 5 years after general relativity and 15 years after special relativity, the space without ether is unthinkable. It's like, well, I mean, if you'll find that one of the things I'll use people's religiosity against them, which hero worship is kind of part of that. And so, when Einstein says it's unthinkable, well, if you believe that Einstein was a genius, then, maybe space without ether is something that is literally just, kind of a bad idea. Maybe. It's just funny. If you have any respect for that person, then maybe you ought to listen to him. Just a thought. Thanks for joining me on this migraine stream. See how long I can make it with this migraine. No, I don't mind talking about anything. You want to talk about? Want to talk about Electric Universe? Let's do it. I mean, I want to talk about spirituality. Let's do that. Let's talk about whatever. That's kind of what this is about. It's just kind of a chat stream. Exactly. Yes. He was a genius, except when he said some things I disagree with. The thing is, I think he was. Well, I don't think he was the person that people believe him to be. I think he was a good guy, and I think he was smart. Both those things are true, and he did definitely add value to science in a variety of ways. But it's just a lot of the surrounding people who were part of that, who were just as big a part or bigger, are a lot of times they're just completely forgotten. And then there's this idea of Einstein that isn't the real man; it's an idol. We create these heroes, these idols that not only are they a bad representation, sometimes they represent something exactly the opposite of the original person of the same name. And so there's this idol Einstein that I've been trying to help people destroy so they can remember who the real man was, because the idol represents something different than he was, and different than he believed, and different from what he taught. And that has become a huge problem, because always, you watch any science show and it's like, oh, well, it was Einstein. So it's like, what? Who cares? And it's like, who cares who it was? Is it true or is it false? And it's there's so much hero worship around it that people just don't look at anything like, how has relativity helped us? Let's do that one. Right. Yeah, exactly. It's like, we all have some bad ideas. We all have some, when you're exploring things realistically, you got to believe that just like the internet or just like anything, there's going to be the ideas that you collect and stuff are going to have truth, and there's going to be falsehood, and you're just trying to curate that, trying to carve out the pieces that are false and get them out of there, and add some pieces back in that are true, get those in there, and always searching back through your knowledge, searching back through yourself, and trying to find the things that are valuable and true. And that's true of any knowledge system. That's what you're supposed to be constantly doing. And unfortunately, knowledge systems become rigid. They're no longer explored. They're no longer questioned. They're no longer curated. And a mind that stores information, which is a model of the world, is constantly being curated. So yeah, of course, that's. I don't want to smite unbelievers, but here's the thing. There is this issue of when the orthodoxy, when the largest group of people, when they are a majority, their voice is much louder. And because their voice is so much louder in everyone's ears, unfortunately, a minority has to speak with more force. And so I actually do engage in a little bit of smiting unbelievers, but specifically for the purpose of speaking more loudly on behalf of a very small minority. In other words, a very small minority of people who understand that ether physics is not pseudoscience, and that ether physics underpins modern physics, that how it there's very few people who understand that Einstein was against constancy. There's very few people who understand that there is absolutely no empirical evidence or no empirical reason to choose Minkowski's spacetime over Poincaré-Lorentz ether. No reason whatsoever. They're mathematically equivalent, and there's never been an experiment to separate them. So, yeah, thanks. Cool. Yes, I am specifically kind of going for a look. Typically, I'm dressed up in some steampunk stuff as well, so usually I'm kind of curating a character. But yeah, I do try to speak more in more outlandish terms and more hyperbolic terms, things like that, because it's sort of a necessity when you're a minority to speak louder. And by louder, of course, I mean emotionally louder. I mean more outlandish in a certain way. In other words, when there is a economy of attention, then you have to find some way to hack the economy of attention to be able to provide something, no matter how valuable it is, because real value doesn't necessarily come to the surface. That's just not reality. Real value can be buried by noise, and unless you're really seeking actual value, you're not going to find it. It doesn't just come out to you automatically. And so the idea that the truth prevails is kind of a silly idealism. And the truth doesn't necessarily prevail. You have to. The truth is something that you have to work really, really, really hard for, and it's always being hidden. And a lie will run around the earth 7 times by the time the truth gets its shoes on. Yeah. Max Thrust, thank you. Appreciate that. So yeah, there's kind of a character that I continue to cultivate. This I got the hairstyle more from one of our favorite movies. What's it called? Fifth Element. I actually I cosplay with my partner. She plays the female character, and I play the guy who was what's his name? Hey babe. No, she's falling asleep. Hey you. What are the characters? It's Corbin Dallas and Lilu. That's right. So we do a cosplay with that, and a lot of cosplay stuff. What'd you say?
I am also falling asleep.
You are also falling asleep. Yeah, exactly. There is a problem with the obsession with individual heroes and creating idols from them, and because those people they're people, they're fallible, and I don't suppose there's anything terrifically bad inherently in the hero worship thing. Having ideals that we aspire to be, and that's kind of what hero worship. The positive side of hero worship is there are ideals that we aspire to be that maybe a little too far, a little too unrealistic, but it's one of those things where we're inspired to reach for the stars because we might hit the moon. So yeah, it's idols can be a negative thing, but then heroes can also be a positive thing. So I try not to be too much of that, except when I see that, here we are. Why is everybody killing each other? Why is there a lot of suffering in the world today with all the technology and things that we're supposed to kind of, decide? We have this idea technology solves so many problems. Did it? Or it caused more problems than it solved? You go and you watch these people who live out in the middle of nowhere, and if they haven't been killed off by disease and all those things that people who are really into technology talk about are the positives, what's left is some people who are relaxed, working a couple hours a day at max, and living life with their family in pure joy with very, 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 very little. And you find that the happiness of a civilization tends to go down as they become more and more civilized. So what's going on? Why are we killing each other? Why is there all these problems? Well, some of it has to do with what we're creating that sort of a sickness of desire for ever more that we can never achieve, but also at the same time there is, what are we fighting over? What is it that is usually it has to do with resource availability. What does resource availability lead to? How do you produce food? What produces the resources? What produces all those things? Well, it's energy. And so when you look at what is then a necessity of achieving more of the things that tend to displace some of the suffering, tend to displace some of the war, tend to alleviate some of that, more energy does that. So of course, all the people who are really interested in alternative views of physics and energy production are basically, what they're interested in is solving the problem with humanity, and how we're killing ourselves with, we're not only just killing each other, we're killing, the ecosystem that we depend upon. We're coming close to, we're getting close to, extincting mankind. We're running ourselves kind of into a corner. Actually, when the well, let me finish my thought. So did I finish my thought? Man, working with a migraine, it's really difficult. I just can't concentrate at all. So yeah, I guess it was just kind of talking about the what is it that we're doing and why we're doing it. Why is it important to us? It's to attempt to solve these problems. Valerian, got a story about that. So when Valerian was first coming out, there was actually a reissue of the movie Fifth Element in theaters. We went in full costume to the theaters, and when we walked in, well, the first time, very few people knew about it because they had multiple showings. And we went full costume into the movie theater. There was like 5 people in the movie theater because nobody knew it came out. The second day it was out, because I don't think it was only out for like 3 days. We walked into a full theater, and the entire crowd broke out in applause. It was great. It was really enjoyable. So like the entire theater as we walk in, and then we, took pictures afterwards outside. So that was a lot of fun. Let's see, I have a game theory. You'll go to hell forever if you don't. Well, I mean, where does the idea of the fear of hell, fear of all these different fears, when you trace it down from a evolutionary standpoint, the reason that you have fear in the first place has to do with survival. Your survival is extremely closely tied with your connection to your group in a gregarious species, and so a lot of our fear and that it has been created by the stress, because stress to your genes means so we've got lots of different behavior models in us that are viable. In other words, we are programmed with instincts that help us, we can understand people's faces, from a very early age, where we have all of these various built-in programs that are expanded upon by our more conscious minds. But there's a tremendous amount of pre-programmed alternatives that are always there, that are there genetically and are constantly under the surface, and they can be altered by circumstances. And there's things like just children who are born to mothers who were starved during a certain period, showed an extreme jump in their risk-taking behavior. There was one of these large sample size cultural studies. I think it was a Scandinavian country. And I need more water. Hey Ben, could you give me some water, please? I might have to cut this short pretty soon. This headache is going crazy. So a lot of the fear and why we end up killing each other and things like that is because one of the things that happens in any species, and if you look at a species that can live in the desert, or especially one that lives in a desert that has wide changes in resource availability, is that as they become more and more stressed out, they have all these pre-programmed behaviors that are basically programs for dealing with avoiding extinction. Like, so you have basically, our genes have all these systems in them for avoiding extinction. Well, one of the ways you go extinct is that if everybody's cooperating and sharing things equally, well, that only really works if you're not all about to die together at the same time because there's a famine. Because if you allow everyone to all die at the same time, because you're all continuing to keep each other alive at the same rate, then basically during famines, your genes of your entire species will go extinct. And so instead, what you have is basically what we see of as evil. And that is people who go into interpersonal competition mode, and the stress of getting the feeling that there's not enough resources will make a generally cooperative species into a violent, interpersonally violent killer sort of species. That will, when they're stressed enough, there are genes that are turned on that are telling them somebody's got to survive, and that might as well be you. And in that way, nature makes sure that there is a competition between who is the strongest, who is actually the strongest. There's no longer enough resources to try lots of different paths and try lots of different alternative genes. Instead, all the resources that are left, we got to figure out who can survive now of the new genes that we created during the times when there was feast. Now that there's famine, we have to pare that down and figure out who is it that can actually survive. And the people who compete with each other are the ones who will end up surviving the famine, the ones who are physically strongest, most dangerous, most capable of, basically in one way or another starving out the competition, whether it be directly through attacking them or through hoarding resources or through, you name it. And sometimes that is a cooperative effort when there's one group fighting with another group. But when it gets down to really where everything is dying, everyone's dying because there's this huge wide scale famine, the genes are all the genes of all the animals are programmed to start giving up those things that grow a larger and larger system that can create a larger and larger animal or group. And instead it ends up creating a system where it's time to figure out who's going to be left, because there's no way to know how long the famine will go. There's no way to know. And so we have to pare down the genes, even though the best thing to do is always try more. That's why in a rainforest, you got a million different species doing silly walks and crazy feathers and all kinds of silly nonsense to be able to find, new possible gene niches that might create a bigger and bigger ecosystem that can survive weird circumstances, because you don't know what circumstance might come up. And so it's like a problem solving system. But then in the desert, you have very few species, very, very, very few species, because there's not so many ecological niches. So there's not as many different genes to try out. And so there's this feast and famine version of our genetic profiles that can be changed epigenetically. And of course, we're altering them all. We are activating the wrong set of genes for a variety of reasons. With we're not adapted to live in the circumstances we're in. Well, the thing is, I believe in non-dual version of reality. If you want to talk about spirituality, I have a strong focus on explaining things entirely from a mechanistic point of view, but I can completely switch gears and explain the exact same thing from an entirely spiritual viewpoint. In other words, like if there's a person here who is listening on behalf of the completely materialistic, what's like Richard Dawkins fan kind of a person that believe that everything spiritual is a complete delusion, I can explain everything in that way. But here's the thing, then to be able to explain the exact same phenomena from a completely spiritual perspective, and the two perspectives meet each other perfectly and interwork is what the project I've been working on for years. And so, yeah, I can completely, switch gears there and start talking about the spiritual aspect of those things and how it is that that works. If you're interested in that sort of thing, I try to focus specifically on the science version of it, because, apparently, the entire physics model that I represent could be called. Well, there's a few different things that could be called, but what was the Kashmir Shaivism is probably the closest thing to a physics model being represented. In other words, being able to talk about a specific religion in a way that very easily translates. Now, I don't believe in that one specific religion per se. I'm just saying that when it comes to the language being easily translated between physics and a version of a religion, I can relate those two. However, most any religion, in one way or another, can have a lot of benefit from the physics model that I've been explaining. And so in some of my papers that I published, there is for instance, a look at the way mental phenomena are produced by that's a long subject. That's why I wrote a paper on it instead of trying to explain it live. The idea of the substrate of the universe being responsible for cognition. In other words, there are a lot of different people kind of look at things as our physical bodies being like an antenna or receiver of consciousness. I don't entirely believe in that idea that because it's absolutely provable that our brains have an impact on on our experience, and so I believe it is dualistic to believe in spirituality first, and that physical world is somehow wrong and bad. And I also don't believe the physical world is entirely an illusion either. And so but I can represent both of those viewpoints in a way that makes sense with a model of physics. Yeah, that is a many thousands year old perspective of things. The idea of as above, so below. There's a lot of different alchemist ideas, and what is in the duat, and for thousands and thousands of years, the study of reality was simultaneously physical and spiritual, and it was only in fairly recent times that we decided to say, forget all that, idea of spirituality and, the as above, so below stuff. Forget about all that. I'll stick with this one view of things. And we kind of went full autismo there. It's a little autistic because we're kind of missing a lot of the complexity and the interconnectivity of things at a higher level and so it's kind of as our minds became more and more computer-like, they started losing the connections. And so, the difference between a old style AI and us being able to understand is kind of in that transition where we sort of, when you become too computer-like and too autistic, and all of us have a little bit, and I'm not saying autism is a bad thing. Actually, I believe it's a specialization that got us out of the caves, and when it comes to technology, and started bringing us towards the ability to create society in a certain way. And so I don't see it as in any way bad. There's actually a convergence between pyromania and autism, actually, that sort of supports my theory that the autistic genes are what sort of brought us towards tool use and fire and things like that. But at the same time, everything, when it's overbalanced, becomes a problem. And so I believe that's where we sort of lost this perspective and broke things down into too small pieces. And as we broke it down into the tiny, tiny, tiny pieces, we started losing the connections that are up above those tiny pieces. And that's how we and so as we started doing that in science, and lost the spiritual abstractions, which are basically large scale abstractions, ways of looking at the smaller scale things and the way that they fit together, the way that they are organized. It's just like thinking about that way that cells work and the way that DNA works. Those are different than the way a multicellular organism has these various organs working together. And the way that the organs work together is on top of that smaller thing. But if you only focus on just the cellular mechanics, you can lose the way that the organs work. If you just never studied anything above the cellular level and only looked at the way the cells communicate and stayed just looking at cells for 20 years and never looked at organs, and you might lose touch with the way that how much organs are important and how much their organization with each other is crucially important. Yeah, I have the same view of, I believe, I don't believe in a beginning or end to the universe. So that's a long story. So I'll kind of skip it a little bit since we're only just touching upon it. But yeah, I believe that the idea of spirit and physical matter explain. And once again, I focus on the materialistic view of things, and that is an information theory-based version of the way that space substrate comes together to create all those things that we think of as part of cognition and part of the way that the world works. I mean, whenever you think of the world as a simulation, then you're kind of thinking of it in terms of mind. There's not really too much of a difference there when you're talking about the computational process that ends up being done that is like mind. So when people who think of themselves as like, oh yeah, I'm into simulation theory, sometimes they don't actually even really recognize that that they're the idea of simulation theory is actually also looking at the world as though it is a great mind. Hey Ben, hey sleepyhead, can I get that water?
Oh, yeah, sorry.
Thank you. Rare breed of religion that states the material world is not bad. Yeah, it is kind of whereas I kind of see myself as Gnostic in a certain way, the Gnostics did have this sort of matter is bad, matter is evil sort of view of things that has come down to us today. The Gnostics actually had, even though they were burned out, they were wiped out by the modern Christian church. They actually had an enormous impact. They were pretty much the first Christian church, and they had an enormous impact on modern Western civilization. People don't realize how much Gnosticism was influenced all the various philosophies. That they, just because the label Gnosticism is gone doesn't mean that the philosophies weren't strongly influenced and continue to hold that influence. In other words, it's just we're still kind of have a base of Gnosticism that we lost the label for as they got burned out and killed off and whatever. Oh, there's an alarm going off. Hold on. Speaking of Gnostic, it's a song from a game that is about Gnosticism. But so yeah, it is uncommon. Running in my green screen here. Which side is that? It's this side here. Why is that doing that? Oh, because I've knocked the edge of it. So there we go. What was I saying? Oh yeah, the idea that matter is bad. Well, the idea that the physical world is an illusion. I think it actually okay. So let's talk about opinion. And this is something that's just kind of I wouldn't represent in anything but informal company. And that is, I kind of have the idea that there is probably, I believe that there probably was some sort of technological advancement in the very great past that is, that there's a lot of reason why that I don't want to get into necessarily right this moment. But I believe that there is some knowledge that people had that, for one reason or another, they had this knowledge, and you'll find that they shouldn't have had this much awareness and understanding of the world around them. But the idea, I think that the idea that matter is bad is a mistranslation or kind of a playing the telephone game with the idea that the universe is holographic. So by holographic, what I mean is that a hologram can seem to be. You can take a hologram to be not real, right? However, the idea of holographic universe is it's not an illusion. It's just not the deepest truth. I got a better explanation. The idea of Plato's cave. So Plato's cave is that what we see is just the shadows on the wall. And there's actually, the person that's in 3 dimensions and, the fire behind them and all that. And all we see is the shadows in the wall. So the idea of matter being bad, the idea of Plato's cave, all these things I think come from the Eleusinian mysteries, all these various mystery religions. I think they had the understanding that that the universe is holographic in nature. You find a lot of these things like in Plato's version of Gaia, the way he talks about minds within minds within minds, being the way that the universe works. And so the idea of the holographic principle is basically the convergence of waves. In other words, it's as waves come together, it creates, matter. But the matter there is just the convergence of waves. So while trying to not get into the way in which holograms physically work, holographic theory is not a statement that reality isn't real. It's not that physical matter isn't real. It's just it is a secondary effect. It's a secondary effect to the real thing that is deeper. And so you can see how playing the telephone game, you could end up saying matter is not real, or matter is, even when you talk about holographic theory to people right now, it's already got the telephone game in it, and people are talking about it right now. And that is that they have the idea, it's like, oh, the reality isn't real. No, that's not what we're saying. We're saying that it is a projection of something from something else. It is not the initial cause, and it is an effect. And that our physical reality being an effect of something deeper is a way of saying that it's an illusion, or it's like saying it's an illusion. But then our linguistic ideas about what is an illusion, what isn't, that can be kind of a problem. When it was a disorder, people didn't understand how much they thought of it as like, oh, I don't have that, so I'm not going to be anything like that, so I'm not going to have any of the. I think it's really important to understand everything's a spectrum, and so understanding that there is a spectrum, and the funny thing is, it has a tremendous amount of overlap with what's it called, sexual dimorphism in humans. So sexual dimorphism and autism are very closely related, and Hans Asperger, I think was his name, was the one who basically called autism the extreme malification of the brain, because there are these changes in different brain areas that are very easily identified as the same as what occur in sexual dimorphism in the brain, and then it becomes just way overboard when you have dysfunctional autism. But of course, you can have a brain that is more malified in tiny amounts, and then because it's area dependent, you can have one area that is more like this malification profile and another area that's less like it. So of course, that's why it's a spectrum, because there's a multitude of variables that are independently adjustable, because it's based upon a constellation of brain areas being changed in a particular way. And so on average, a brain could be more male, or on average could be more female, or it could be more in the middle, and all mixed up by parts. But so yeah, it being a spectrum, instead of being called a disorder, I prefer it being called a spectrum, because when we start calling things spectrums, we start to understand that this is just, when you take something and it goes too far and becomes unbalanced, that's when it becomes dysfunctional. And there's different levels of dysfunction. Like one of the things I like to point out is that when you compare a marathon runner, a world-class marathon runner with a world-class heavy lifter, each one of them can laugh and look down on the other within their field, and they could just be like, "Oh, you're such crap at lifting. You can't lift anything." And I was like, "Oh, look at you. You fucking fall apart after 3 steps. You're terrible." There's these ways in which that each one of them could look at the other as disabled, but the truth of the matter is they're just specialists. That's all. And understanding that there's a spectrum can help people understand there's a give and take, and that as you move to one side or the other, you can gain things and lose things. Now, that's not saying there aren't people who are dysfunctional and lose, like they don't gain much with their dysfunction. Part of the reason why they don't gain much with their dysfunction is because a lot of times because they are labeled as dysfunctional, nobody tries to take advantage of their extreme advantages. In other words, it's like, say for instance, you bred some sort of animal to be able to build like massive muscles and get really, really strong, but it can never be fast. Then if you tried to, if you never gave it any exercise, you wouldn't be taking advantage of it, and so it'd just be disabled. And so that can kind of happen with you know, specializations in our brains and in our bodies and stuff like that. So I think it's valuable to continue to call it a spectrum instead of having it as just labeled as this is, because then where do you put the line? You know, where's the line? Yes, I read every one of these books. Actually, my real library is over there. A writing book about talking weasels, fantasy adventure, supposedly for children. yeah. There's the game I was just talking about is Final Fantasy X. It's all about this Gnostic story, but you know, a lot of it comes from Zoroastrianism, like you mentioned. But I like in Final Fantasy X, there's this idea of this recurring. I'll just give you a quick overview of the story from Final Fantasy X and why I like it. It's a in it there are these. I mean, they actually use language from Gnosticism as well. There's aeons and things like that, but there's this story of this spirit being called to become this individual, and it's called from another world and becomes this individual, and then that individual typically is sacrificed and becomes the next of the reason it's sacrificed is to stop this great evil called sin. And then when it's sacrificed, sin goes away, but always comes back. But the thing is, the sacrificed one becomes the next sin, this creature that comes and attacks. And so somebody else has to be sacrificed. And so you have this recurring theme of the one, like from the Matrix, which, by the way, there's just tons and tons of these stories of the one. And I think it's a story that for each person, their own kind of journey towards becoming an individual, which, you know, you have at various, you know, not just mystery religions. You know, there's this journey that each individual is kind of going through during the development of their own consciousness, and so that sort of becoming an individual that you have in. I really like the alchemist version of individuation, but the story of becoming an individual, Gnosticism, all these things are related because they're all kind of coming from ancient sources. But yeah, you'll find the Gnostic story so many different places. But in Final Fantasy X, the what's neat is that the idea is, instead of this, so the idea that they're kind of representing there is this the sacrifice of the one becoming the next sin. Another version of that is sort of represented in Frank Herbert's Dune, where the Kwisatz Haderach, he's thinking about how he doesn't want to become another symbol that for religious zealotry and becoming the next, you know, another. I mean, he could see a plague of his followers after, you know, long after he's gone, sweeping across the universe and doing massive destruction in his name, and you know, and so there's this idea that heroes, Muad'Dib, yes. So there's this idea of heroes changing. In other words, they're becoming an idol, and the idol not being who they originally were, but instead becomes this thing. So they start out as a person who has a big impact on a lot of people, and then it slowly gets twisted into this thing that oppresses the people, and a lot of times the way in which they became popular to the people is because there was this other oppressing thing that they defeated. And so it's this cycle that happens over and over. And that's kind of a Gnostic story you'll find all throughout Gnosticism. And then what was really cool with Final Fantasy X's version, or all throughout, I mean, it's all throughout fiction, period. It's just everywhere. Final Fantasy X's version was the idea that you don't have to sacrifice the one. The one doesn't have to be sacrificed. We can defeat sin once and for all. And, you know, it's a neat little, you know, version of the story that they put together there. I think Gnosticism is actually very popular somehow to Japanese people, I guess, because they seem to have it in their media a lot more than I would expect. It's a background in their media a lot more than Western media, I suppose. Yeah. So at the deepest level, there's one of the things that I represent for this idea of spirituality and physics being interchangeable, and being able to say this, say the universe is entirely spirit, or the universe is entirely material, and basically once you explain it in detail, showing that you're saying the exact same thing. Gets down to there's a certain point at which we have to, when you're talking about explaining the idea of eternity, or the idea of infinity, anything that is infinite, you kind of have this a necessity of a breakpoint. So there's some point at which we have to have some sort of irrational thing that we believe in. Period. Now, a lot of people have already accepted, quantum physics stuff as their irrational breakpoint, because everybody else is like, oh yeah, it's completely rational because we can describe it mathematically. No, you can describe complete nonsense mathematically as well. It doesn't make it rational. Then there's a variety of ways in which you can decide what your nonsense is, and then how many points of nonsense do you have in your model. And by nonsense, what I mean is something that is irrational, something that doesn't work in the way that everything else works. And in modern theoretical physics, we have a lot of these various breakpoints. One of them is, mostly it comes from constancy. It's always back to constancy. Like I said, in a year, I will have said this at least 1,000 times. Everything comes back to constancy, which is not empirically supported. So the breakpoint that you kind of have to come to, though, is, well, what happened before the Big Bang? What happened? Where's the start of the one thing that you have to be able to accept is the idea of no beginning and no end. In other words, everything is just a transition. We put these artificial borders on things that aren't real borders, that everything's a continuum, and that there's a usefulness to the borders, that but it's not particularly real. So, like for instance, when you look up at two clouds, that are nearly touching each other, the truth of the matter is just a slight change in the pressure can make it where the water content in the air in one area versus the other isn't a real separator. You're just saying it's a separator because of some visual part of it. But looking at it from another perspective, the total water content of the air in that area is not any different. And so your separation of it into two clouds instead of one cloud is arbitrary based upon some specific thing, but it's still useful. Still, when you say, hey, look at the cloud on the left, right behind it is this, versus the cloud on the right, it's still useful. Even it doesn't matter that it's all one thing from a certain perspective. That doesn't matter when you're trying to explain, hey, there's a plane behind the cloud on the left. And so there's useful, and then there's truth, and the truth has a lot of different ways that you have to look at it from. So yeah, there's a seeing the idea of the ether as I don't see it necessarily as a manifestation, but I see it as it's the way in which both the physical and spiritual world work. Because when I talk about the spiritual world, I'm talking about it from an information theory perspective. In other words, it's the way in which, how I'd say to people who are non-spiritual, it is the way the simulation works. It's the way it executes. It's the computing substrate. But then how is that computing substrate? Where does it come from? And that is the place in which the only way you can solve the whole idea of no beginning and no end, and basically Gödel's incompleteness. What is Gödel's incompleteness? Gödel's incompleteness is a problem of infinite regress. The problem of infinite regress, this sentence is false. If you tried to evaluate this sentence is false, you'll create a copy of it in your brain. And if you do it the wrong way, which is getting stuck in an infinite loop, you go back and forth between the two. And we have ways in which we just halt in things that have these infinite loops in them, because, well, of course, a program that works has to be able to halt infinite loops, and a brain that works has to have a way to halt infinite loops. And there are infinite loops that can be introduced to your brain. And so the infinite loop will make it go switch back and forth and back and forth. But Gödel's incompleteness is basically about the necessity of an exterior, something outside. How to keep this simpler. I actually enjoyed Tarski's undefinability as an aspect of Gödel incompleteness. Better to describe this idea of an external reference necessity. Another way of looking at it is if you were the only thing in the universe, nothing else exists but you, can you move? No, of course you can't. You can move your arms, you can flap your arms because they're moving with respect to something else. You need an exterior reference. So the very existence of the ether, and so at the base of reality, the way in which things exist, have to be in this cycling interdependence. That's the yin and yang concept. But it's a question, like when you ask the question, what happened, what came first, the chicken or the egg? You're asking a question that inherently has an infinite regress in it. And you have to be able to stop an infinite regress some way, and stop that infinite loop and be able to recognize that it is a loop that is just changing over time. And that's what, where does it, what came first, the chicken or the egg? The Big Bang, infinity, something, the answer to it is to follow it back infinitely. And to see that it's slowly one changes the other, changes the other, changes the other, back and forth. There's the water is cutting a path through the riverbed, and the riverbed is guiding the water. So which one's the one making the decision? Which one's giving the guidance? The water or the rock? Well, the rock and the river both are moving each other. So understanding at the very base of reality, there is this idea. Then accepting just this one idea that there are no beginnings and ends. That there is specifically just continuity that is divided in this way that allows there to be two different things, yin and yang, akasha and prana, then allows this base substance to exist and to have always existed. And then from there, you have this idea of matter being created from the ether. So in other words, it is the action of the ether, it is the interplay of the two aspects of the ether that end up the motion or energy or I guess it's the motive force and guiding principle, the physicality aspect of the ether and the energy aspect of the ether and so we can't think of ether as matter-like. We have to think of matter as ether-like, and that's one of the things that people are like, well, you're saying you're giving me this materialist view of spirituality. Well, not really, because what I'm saying is there's something at the base of reality that is occurring that, yeah, you think of it as materialistic and even mechanical and maybe unappealing because of this mechanical aspect to it, but you got to bear in mind, all I'm saying is that the physical world comes from this thing that you would think of as the spiritual world, which is a computational substrate. Yeah. Yeah, the fear of hell. I don't know. How much is the fear of hell? I think there is a generalized fear that people have that has to do with separation from something, and people tend to have kind of a the probably the most basic mental illness categorization is solipsism, and that is you have yourself and then everything outside of you. That's it. That's you. That got these two things, and that's all that you ever think of. And that way, you can punish one group of people for what another group of people did because it's reality that did something mean to you, and you're just getting what's it called? Justice, revenge. You're just getting revenge on reality for what reality did to you. And there's this kind of a solipsism is a basic thing there. And so there is this fear of not being accepted by reality that is also kind of a fear of being hated by God. As there's this general fear of separation that is kind of like the fear of hell, and I think someone can become obsessive about it, but you don't necessarily need the idea of hell to be given to you specifically from a book to still have the idea of hell. That is the hellish experience of being unloved, unwanted, outside, and separated. Is kind of a general horror that is most deeply ingrained in any, especially in the gregarious species, but in anything that relies upon love, and love is kind of a looked at from a very mechanical sort of view. It is the basis for multicellular life. In other words, the first time that two cells, bound their existence together was the first time that love was expressed. It's it is kind of the way in which unity occurs, and this growth into something larger, into something that can survive better through the interrelationship of these various parts. So I don't know. I think the concept of hell can still sort of be there in regardless of what culture you're from. It's just it's expressed differently to you. In Japan, one of the things that they say is the nail that stands up will get hammered down. And I think that's kind of the same expression of being an outcast from society. I think that everybody has that general basic fear of being an outcast. And other levels of being responsible for things. I see it as a single fundamental substrate. I've actually got a model of Planck scale units that I don't know if I want to reveal yet, but I may wait till I've got a paper that I put out on it before I show it. But no, I think that there is a one single substance doing things, but our idea of substance. Once again, there are a lot of material behaviors that we can apply to ether because material comes from the action of ether. It exists by the nature of ether's action. And so because of that, material is very ether-like. And so therefore, when we look at the other way, we can say, oh, well, ether is very material-like in these specific ways. And so, yeah, I think that there is a single fundamental substrate that is the light-carrying medium, but it is also, so it's electromagnetism, all of the different types of. Well, if you want to get into the particle physics, et cetera, all of the various particles, those are just complex behaviors of ether. In other words, you can break things up, very complex behaviors, into sets of stereotyped behaviors that you want to separate out. But once again, it's whenever you try to separate out a continuum into its parts, it can be useful, like different clouds. It's two different clouds. Well, is it two different clouds based on what? You can do that, and it's valuable. But is it true? Depends. It's not true for all circumstances because your abstraction can be misleading in certain ways when you apply it in the wrong way. Well, I hate to here's the thing. Okay, so part of my mission, and I'm hoping that all of you will join me in it, is that I find it crucial in building the bridge between science and spirituality, that one of the things that I do is I make sure to really criticize modern science on any magical thinking. In other words, anytime that there's anything that can be identified as magical thinking, anything that is superstitious, anything that has no understanding, that has no underlying basis, that is acausal, like randomness, for instance, I call it magical thinking. And I'm very critical of it. And once again, there's that thing about being a minority versus a majority and what's necessary. So I am much more harsh than I would be with person to person when I'm dealing with a group. When I'm dealing with this group, I have to be larger. I have to be harsher. I have to deal with the group just like when you're dealing with a crowd, like you're being trampled in a crowd. When you're being trampled in a crowd, you have to do something to make sure the crowd understands that you're going to die. And sometimes that means with an individual, you're pushing really, really hard on one individual who doesn't really deserve it because they're not responsible for what the whole crowd is doing. But so my point is that I do actually make sure to criticize certain concepts very harshly, and any kind of magical thinking I specifically try to shy away from, because my purpose here is to point out the way in which modern physics has failed, and it's done so by not adhering to its own principles. So because it is not adhering to its own principles and being irrational, that is the most important way to get people to recognize that they need to return to first principles, that they need to, like one of the biggest problems with modern science is that they believe that they love to doubt things. I was just watching like SciShow on YouTube, and it's like, scientists love to be wrong. Bullshit. They don't love to be wrong. Okay, if it's a long time theory that they've held, they don't like the basis. Now, if they're wrong about one little tiny thing that they can easily fix, well, everybody loves to be wrong about one little tiny thing that they can easily fix. Everybody does. But when it's something big, when it's something huge, when it's something that makes you look stupid, nobody will easily allow that to be shown to the world that they've been a moron for 3/4 of their life. If it's got that kind of feel, nobody wants to be that kind of wrong. So because they believe that they love to be wrong, they then do not believe that they are failing in that particular way. So therefore, they are not self-examining their ability to admit when they're wrong. So the very belief that all these people, everybody who loves science says scientists love to be wrong. Scientists are the one group, they're always ready to believe they're wrong. They say that so much that it has literally made it harder for them to doubt themselves, because they believe they're already doubting themselves sufficiently. And so that's a huge problem that I'm like, oh, stop saying that. No, scientists are human and they don't love to be wrong, okay? And they are, so many over and over and over, failing to recognize when they've been wrong. So that said, explain the ether to people in a palatable way. In other words, I would like, if you're going to be a proponent of ether, if you're going to, and I would love for as many people as possible to join me on this journey of attempting to present the bridge between science and spirituality. And that is, it has to work for atheism. In other words, you have to be able to explain things to somebody who is a hardcore atheist, who is a dyed-in-the-wool Dawkins. They've got, like, I've got a couple of his books over there, The God Delusion, and a couple of others. But you have to be able to explain things in that manner, completely acceptable to that group, to have any success whatsoever in the future, have any hope of ever creating a bridge that goes both directions along the science and spirituality. So with that in mind, I try to make sure to always point out anything that's magical, period. Now, that said, when you're talking to an individual and you're just trying to explain, well, what is the ether? Well, it's what light travels through. It's what, if you want to give an overview, man, what's an easy way to explain it? Probably the best way to give people an idea of what the ether is to maybe tell them that the reality you see is the face of the watch. The ether is the gears underneath it. And understanding that the ether is what produces the reality that you see is probably a better way of representing it. But at the same time, well, what is that? That's kind of an unappealing way of putting things. But I think you can do both. In other words, you could tell them it's like, well, how is mind? How is this? How does it have anything to do? Well, if our minds are connected and are driven by this one system, this one clockwork, then are they not then also connected in a very real way, just like electromagnetic sources are connected to each other, and then you can kind of drive them towards asking questions there. But then you have to really get into the neuroscience and how brains are not too warm, wet, and noisy to be able to pick up subtle electromagnetic signals. There's things like stochastic resonance, and there's a variety of things in the way the brains work that show how they actually do work according, as a result of electromagnetic signals, as a result of coordinated firing patterns, and all of these things are related to the outside world. And it even gets down to some interesting what is it called? Man, I can't remember the frequency, but there's a frequency of light that actually impacts biological molecules that is that people are very interested in right now for all the wrong reasons, and have conspiracy theories around it. But it's not what they think it is, I suppose. Seeing spirit as energy. I do not believe spirit and energy are the same. Okay, yeah, I agree with that, because if you just look at spirit as, you know what? I should actually link to my 3S videos, because the 3S videos, let me grab that real quick, they really explain things in a way that appeals to a spiritual side of things. 7 Sage. Let me give you this. There we go. Here. So this video is it's a recap of a set of videos in which I explain that there is it's dualism to believe that spirit and energy are just one thing. In other words, but there's some you have to redefine what exactly energy is. And energy actually it's like whenever you try to explain yin and yang, you have to make sure that you have the dot in the middle of each side, and that is that whenever you're trying to explain them. Wait, did I mess this up again? Nope, it's over this way. There we go. You know what? I could share screen. But whenever you try to explain yin and yang, and as you start to explain one, you start to begin explaining the other, and that's always going to happen when you're talking about energy at the lowest level, because of the fact that there's something called potential energy. So if you were introduced to the concept of potential energy and you didn't balk at it a little bit at first, then you weren't paying close enough attention, because there is basically this idea of energy where you have electricity, you have motion, things like that, and then suddenly you start talking about potential energy. What the hell is potential energy, right? And it has to do with the configuration of things. Well, the configuration of things is information. And so whenever you start talking about energy, at the same time, you are also talking about structure. With potential energy, it's part of the entire energy, pattern of the universe, the way that energy ends up existing, because of the problem is we don't define energy well enough. It's too fuzzy. But and the reason it's too fuzzy is because it's not yin or yang. It's both. And so that's why it ends up fuzzy, is because you're going to end up stuck in a loop of going back and forth between the two, that you're, when it's something that is sort of self-generating in a certain way. And when you're trying to explain the chicken and the egg problem, and that's sort of the same thing when talking about energy. So there is an aspect of information to energy, and so whenever you're talking about spirit, if you're going to be talking about spirit, then you need to also talk about structure. There has to be something that gives structure for the information to exist in a way that can represent something, and that representational structure comes from the combination of ether and motion, and that's what gives the divisions that allows there to be relationships, which the relationships allows there to be data, and the data allows there to be those things that you would think of as souls or spirits or things of that nature. So in a certain way, I agree with the idea of looking at the spirit as energy based, because there is the overarching energy, I suppose, the configuration of things, the flow of things. But the videos I just linked are actually probably I made a couple of videos a few years back that were intended to be kind of a series pilot. And but Guy never got back to me, so I just sort of abandoned that project. But I did a good job of explaining this idea of yin and yang from a spiritual perspective. So you might want to check those out. Private city built by enthusiasts. Well, see, here's the thing: there is a steampunk revolution that is occurring now. I mean, I know a lot of people enjoy the steampunk aesthetic, and they're really kind of into the aesthetic more than anything. But I'm actually into the fact that there is this Clockwork Universe view that the greatest thing I love about it is this Clockwork Universe view, this deterministic view, because it's based on Pilot Wave, and that's really oversimplifying it, but in the end, there is this chaotic determinism that is sort of clockwork-like, that is the basis of the universe. And what I love about it is only by having this rational basis can you actually explain spirituality from an information theory perspective and allow spirituality and to kind of work for somebody who's an atheist. In other words, have an explanation of spirituality that an atheist could actually accept. So how do you live out steampunk? Well, there's a that sounded really bad, and it was okay. She's playing Cyberpunk right now. I don't know if you guys are hearing it. And the tea is coming this way. Do what? A towel? Yeah, you should probably go grab a towel. I do not have a towel here, though. Be careful. Don't cut yourself. Ceramic can be extremely sharp, so please be careful. Yes. Please don't fall on ceramic shards. So yeah, it should be a private city built by enthusiasts. It'd be nice if people kind of embrace the whole retro futurism viewpoint, but and I love all the stories and stuff, but the living steampunk is a bit difficult. But I don't think it'll necessarily be all that difficult for a lot of people to get together as enthusiasts and continue to have the little fairs. And a lot of the steampunk aesthetic and idea and culture is kind of sort of against mainstream in a certain way. It's a rebellious. But it's rebellion within a structure, and that's one of the things that kind of draws me to the whole steampunk idea. But the ideal behind it, when you kind of have this perspective that I've been teaching for years, it really works as an entire worldview, and so I don't think you necessarily need to build a private city for enthusiasts. I think that it can kind of infuse society with with this forward-looking idea that comes from the past. That there may be a different way of being that is right on the horizon. Because the truth of the matter is there is a neoclassical physics revolution that's occurring underneath the surface. There's very few people who actually understand exactly what it is, and but what's happening in major universities, MIT and Cambridge for the most part, are the two leading universities that are viewing things from a hydrodynamic analog view. By what I mean by hydrodynamic analog, that's just another way of saying ether. And people try not to say the word ether because it's been a curse word for so long. But it is but the ether is making a comeback, and you're gonna end up seeing. Who knows how long it's going to take? Probably take at least another 10 years before people even are allowed to say the word ether without being looked at it weirdly. But it's happening. So I think there's a you'll be able to live out steampunk just by following this channel. That's what you need to do. That's how you do it. You follow this channel, follow my videos, you will live it out. Okay, the reason I'm not spirit equals energy is because energy seems to only want to exist and move in a stream. Not like me, I'm not matter energy because, energy definitely moves in very complex ways. I think maybe your idea of energy may be too restrictive, I suppose. But I mean, at the same time, the idea of, I understand the problem with the idea of spirit equals energy, because there is, when you just have energy defined in terms that are as fuzzy as they are right now, and then the understanding of energy not being, we can quantify energy. We know when we see it. We can quantify energy in a variety of ways, but being able to explain it really well to connect it at a very, very fundamental level, there's problems there. And so I'm not matter equals energy because energy flowing through energy. Yeah, okay. So does water not flow through water? Of course it does. You look at the Gulf Stream going through the ocean. There's water flowing through water, and this causes borders. And along those borderlines between laminar flows, you have these little vortices that end up building up as they're going across each other. Just like when you were a kid, you did this and you made little funky little things in your hands. There's these little flywheels. They're not flywheels, little what are they called? It's a different kind of wheel, but it allows these things to move against each other, and that happens in flows of water or any other fluids, and it ends up being called viscosity in certain cases. And there are laminar flows where you have differential flows between each other, and one set will be going a different direction from the other set, and that creates a division that isn't really a division. So that's what I'm talking about, is that there are arbitrary divisions that are created by motion. And so you can see this in the flows of liquids. So there are arbitrary divisions that they're useful and they're real in a certain sense, but are they real, or is it really divided? It's not useful to say it's divided in all circumstances. It is useful to say it's divided in some circumstances. So that's why I think that perhaps your idea of spirit equals energy, coming from more the larger spirituality group, and not informed as much by both physics as well as a very deep look at information theory based, by the way, there's somebody called Nicole Younger Halpern, who's been a big, she's got a steampunk physics laboratory, one of the first steampunk physics laboratories to exist. It's actually part of a, lots of major organizations. What does she call it specifically? Major educational organizations are behind it, because it's basically looking at thermodynamics from quantum steampunk. That's what she calls it. It is looking at thermodynamics from an information theory based perspective, and that's very relevant to my research. Yeah, Gaia's I like some of their stuff. and I don't like some of their stuff. And so they're kind of a really, really mixed bag for me too. Like really mixed. Like, okay, let's put it this way. Whenever you have a group of really, really nice people, loving people, kind people, what they end up setting up is systems of trust, systems of implicit trust, and extreme trust. And then whenever you have a large group of people using extreme trust, the immediate thing that's going to occur is parasites who will go in and try to use that. So whenever you go to like any convention of people where there is a lot of loving, kind, trusting, open-minded people, you'll have people there who are preying upon them. And so therefore it always throws people who are good at seeing that, it always throws them off, because they'll see those people can quickly gain a lot by preying upon those people. And because they can gain a lot, they become very visible. So therefore, because they're immediately visible, because they're gaining a lot by preying upon these people, it turns people off to the whole thing. They look at the top as the whole thing. And people have this idea about Christianity, for instance. There's the televangelists who are preying upon good people are not representative of those people. And those people are not stupid for being trusting or loving or attempting to be open-minded or attempting to work together. In other words, every time you get tricked on the street by some con artist, is it your fault for not noticing it? No, it's not, because they use systems of implicit trust that humans use to be able to work together better. So people it is entirely their fault. That's why we punish them. That's why we, as a society in general, we hate them, because they tear down the very necessity of cooperation. All of the trust systems, when they tear those things down, it makes it where we can no longer collaborate. We can no longer do things in bigger groups. The group starts to break down into pieces, and then the pieces start competing with each other. And as you start having, basically everybody becomes more and more paranoid and less trusting. And as you have more people being paranoid, you're defending yourself against things that weren't actually attacks because your pattern recognition is off. And you think somebody is, probably once you start getting this idea that people are doing shitty things to try to exploit you, then you see boogeyman around every corner. And so these people who destroy trust by being con men they have to be dealt with. They have to be dealt with. But so the thing is, I like Gaia, but I think there's a lot of con men there too. I like some of the interesting things that they bring up, but I think there's just so many con men stirring the pot and screwing things up that there's the baby ends up really tiny and the bathwater ends up being like an ocean. And so it's kind of hard to separate the baby from the bathwater there. But I think there's a lot of people who support the Gaia programs, a lot of people who believe in the same things that are represented in the Gaia programs because they resonate with those people because they're actually true. In other words, I think or true in a certain sense at the very least. Just like I talked about early on in this podcast, there was I said that there's a baby in excuse me. What was? Oh man, this headache, man. Woo. Yeah, live stream, whatever. I was trying to talk about the idea of the baby in the bathwater, but I just completely lost my train of thought, actually. So it wasn't that important. The point is that there's some good ideas that they have that are true in a certain sense. Oh, I guess that's what it was. Is I was talking about the levels of truth and the spirit of the fishing tree that I talked about earlier, and the natives who believe in the spirit of the fishing tree are right in a certain way within their context, within their life. They are right that when you properly honor the spirits, it gets you fish and you can survive. But they are wrong when it comes to engineering. But then we're wrong about the way in which we represent things, because all these things that were captured about the proper way of dealing with the spirits were very subtle. And so now here in our modern world, we're only just now learning about how there's an internal microbiome and how much of that, how we overuse all of these things that kill all the various bacteria and stuff that we need to survive. All of these things were because we failed to respect these ancient traditions, which are basically kind of like failing to honor the spirits properly. So there is a way in which modern society is completely wrong also, even though we know that the fishing tree, well, they're just beating a root in there. It's just a neurotoxin, and we'll be able to use that to engineer some sort of medicine that will probably hurt people, will help people who have neuralgia, and they can't do anything with their idea of the spirit of the fishing tree other than just get fish. So our idea is superior. In a certain way, it's superior, but it's one of those things where we're comparing a marathon runner to a heavy lifter. They're two different specializations, and sometimes over specialization does come with some severe problems when you really go overboard. But you don't want to throw away the baby with the bathwater. Okay, so the idea of instantaneous transmission of anything, there's a lot to say about that. So first of all, light is not the universal speed limit whatsoever, really. That's a misunderstanding from special relativity and is completely against what Einstein said over and over and over and over and over and explained through general relativity, and specifically talked about constancy needing to be abandoned. And so the idea that light can't travel, that nothing can travel faster than light, is an oversimplification, a misunderstanding, and is basically bullshit. It's just completely wrong. But it's a very complex thing to understand why that's true. Understanding there's an anisotropic constancy and then there's isotropic constancy, and the two things are wildly different, and both of them can be called constancy. And the type that Einstein was saying does not work is called isotropic constancy, and that is the most common view of light is the speed limit of the universe and all those ideas. So that said, I don't believe in instantaneous motion of anything at all whatsoever. That there's no reason to believe that whatsoever. But signals traveling faster than light. There's one author, friends with him on Facebook actually, that he wrote a paper on signals traveling many orders of magnitude faster than the speed of light in a Kosarat continua-based electromagnetism model. And so I believe in the ether under the Kosarat brothers, which is also known as micropolar elasticity. It was resurrected here in like the 50s or 60s or something. It was actually written in 1909 by the two Kosarat brothers, and it was translated to English by David Delphinich of neoclassicalphysics.info.org.com. I don't remember, but you look up neoclassical physics and you'll find him. And that is the version of ether that makes no sense. So that said, it seems as though there may be a possibility of light signals traveling many times the speed of light. How? Why? Specifically because if you look at light as a transverse wave, well, one of the things that happens in earthquakes, I'll give you a good example, is that when you have an earthquake, you've got two different wave fronts that go out there, the longitudinal waves and then the transverse waves. The longitudinal waves are the ones that you feel first. You feel the first, bam, very fast and harsh, and then much later, you feel the transverse waves. So the ground is shifting back and forth. So there's two different types of waves that travel in a solid that's longitudinal and transverse, and they travel at two different speeds. So we know that light travels as a longitudinal, transverse wave. And so are there transverse waves in the ether? Possibly. I believe that they're probably is, actually. Don't know. Don't have enough evidence specifically. And so that is the one way in which the idea of entanglement and instantaneous action at a distance and all that sort of stuff could be resolved in a certain way. Because what you're talking about is, and then the idea of a particle. Okay. Oh, I explained this in my video on it's my follow-up video to my chat with Deepak Chopra, and where I talk about a particle as like if you've ever seen one of those puzzles where you've got one space missing and there's a lot of little pieces. When you move the pieces around, basically you're kind of moving the space around. Are you moving the space? The space doesn't move. It's the pieces that you're moving, but the thing that you notice is the space, or at least that depends on when you're looking at the little puzzle with the little pieces. You can concentrate on seeing the space move around, or you can concentrate on seeing the pieces move around. Particles are the spaces. They're not, the pieces are the ether. And so, everything that we are is basically kind of the foam at the edges of the universe. The real, true, hard, solid thing is space. The universe is inside out from what we believe. So in that perspective, you can see me take you take a piece of thread, spin it, and spin it and spin it and spin it and twist it. And what will happen is it'll twist up on itself. And what you can do is you can pull it tight and then bring it close enough together, and then a knot will appear. And you pull it tight, and then a knot will appear somewhere else. Or sometimes it will. Sometimes it'll get some memory in that one place, and it'll reappear right there. The point here is to point out that the effect of the medium to create a localized event that is the twisting up of the medium, the string, is basically what I'm saying that most particles are. But now there are waves traveling from one place to the other that are interacting with the substance. So the substance has waves in it. And then the other thing that is important to recognize, there's something called vortex filaments. Just a moment. So all shot through all of ether are these, and through any kind of superfluid, are these little filaments, little threads of vortices. And so vortex filaments are kind of an important part of the model. And in these vortex filaments, you have knots, and you have and so basically the waves. Okay, remember how earlier I was talking about water moving against water creates what creates is vortices. It creates little vortexes. As the two different sets of laminar flows are moving against each other, you have something that is these little vortexes. Well, in superfluids, which is what ether behaves like, or in a Kosaret continuum, they automatically, which by the way, superfluids can be described as Kosaret continuum. It automatically creates these vortex filaments of vortices. And then the thing is, you have to understand there's something called wave-vortex duality. And that is when actually, I don't have the cat toy here, but I have a cat toy that I use where it's got a little ball and that goes around a little track, and you can take it and just move it straight in and out, and you'll create a vortex from your wave. And so the point is to see that there's this wave vortex duality that happens all throughout anything in fluid dynamics. And because you can pump a vortex with a wave, and waves shed vortexes. And so there's whenever you're talking about wave particle duality, actually what's occurring is wave vortex duality. And then that makes everything start to make sense. And you don't need any kind of instantaneous action at a distance. And I believe that Einstein was right. There is no spooky action at a distance. So, I don't, one of the things that you'll find in any one of the delayed choice quantum eraser, or, Wigner's cat and Wigner's friend, and not Wigner's cat, it's Schrodinger's cat, but, Wigner's friend. And like, there's a million different ideas about entanglement and the action at a distance, and it's all, once you really, really dig deep into it, it's them confusing themselves and viewing things from a perspective where they're basically accidental illusionists. When you have a certain set of ideas that you believe that are nonsense, and then you set up an experiment to prove that idea, you're not falsifying it. So they gave up on falsification, which was a very important principle, and they instead are attempting to prove something that is nonsense. And of course, so they always come up with they always find evidence for their nonsense. But there is no spooky action at a distance. It is not in every one of these experiments that I've looked at, the way they set it up, and you have to really, really question the basic ideas behind it to really get at the problem. When you look at it, you end up finding that they're not questioning the right axioms, and they're making assumptions that, of course, lead them to interpret the experimental results in a particular way, and that gives them this instantaneous action at a distance that's just not occurring. And so there's a variety of ways in which you can understand the idea of wave-particle duality, and it's just as like an event. One of the things I explain very frequently is, say you get a bunch of like the moai, that are the Easter Island statues, and you half submerge them in the ocean. And so they're standing there, half submerged in the ocean. A wave comes up, almost knocks all of them over, but it doesn't, because they're all right next to each other, and it doesn't let the water through, but it does. They kind of tip just a little, and then they tip back, and then they're fine, and then the wave bounces off. Now, imagine if I just took those statues and arranged them like a funnel. What happened is that that wave that was coming in, instead of bouncing straight off, it would actually add and add and add, and the wave would get higher and higher and higher, and knock over the statues at the end of the funnel, same size wave. So there is a threshold, a certain amount, a certain height of the wave required to knock over the statue. And this is kind of a description of what happens when light interacts with matter to create moving an electron from one orbital to another. And so there are these transitions that happen that have to do with border conditions, that they're not, what you're seeing is an event. It's not a particle. And now we have something called phonons that have to do with sound, that have to do with, it just has to do with the way in which the medium works. Nobody believes a phonon actually exists, but you can use all the same quantum mechanical calculations and things of that nature to arrive at the same, to basically arrive at a discrete treatment of continuous phenomena. It's just physical waves. There's nothing special about a phonon occurring in a crystalline lattice. It's not an actual discrete particle, but we can treat it as a discrete particle because it's useful, because it's related to transition effects, things that it's like you have to get over this certain threshold for something to happen. And so this unit is a threshold, just like the amount of water required to knock over one Easter Island statue. There are transition events. And so as things are moving through the ether, you have just waves, but you also have the ether is shot through with all these tiny little threads of vortex filaments, and the waves impacting with the threads causes them to rotate faster, and there can be something that can basically rip them apart into a whole. And then what you have is a situation in which you can create something like a soliton. Yeah, it comes from all the way back from Kelvin. Kelvin's the first one who put it together, and a lot of these people, like I said before, that I'm just reading all of the original authors, and I don't read any of the newer authors, because generally they don't seem to have the right. They don't have the right take on things. They seem to always be missing something. I've tried to read some of the newer authors on Ether, and they seem to always get it wrong somehow. And it's like, I don't understand how they keep getting it wrong. I mean, if you just rely on the base data that everybody had in the 19th century and just extend only from there, I mean, there's very few things that'll fit with modern physics and 19th century physics. You can't. There's only very, very, very finite ways you can basically meet all the slaloms required of the experimental data, and you come to very specific conclusions. And whenever they start deviating off of that, I'm like, what are you doing, man? That's not what the data says. That doesn't fit with modern evidence. You're not giving an explanation for why it doesn't fit with modern evidence, because the only modern evidence that really has to be kind of discarded is the instantaneous action at a distance stuff, that non-physical magical thinking nonsense. And then whenever you have these problems, when you're looking at the way in which constancy works, there is no
There is no one-way speed of light experiment that has ever been done, period. There's never been one done. That doesn't mean it's impossible, but it does mean that we have a non-empirical basis for modern physics. That is a singular failure point that specifically Einstein said, don't believe that. And we believe that. And everybody teaches you that in every class you go on. You can go talk to anybody right now. Still, I've been preaching this for a very long time, very, very long time. And you can just find it in history. I can give you all the quotes. You can look it up yourself. I'm not making anything up here, but for some reason, word of mouth and tradition and things like that always overrule people's ability to just look it up. Just look at the history, the undeniable, unquestionable history. Einstein said, constancy don't work, and yet everybody's taught constancy today everywhere, no matter where you look. And it's just like, oh, how, why, what? It's so weird to sometimes to be like, it's not that hard to find this information, it's just history. But people don't teach history anymore, they just teach tradition. And that's the problem, is they're not looking at it objectively because they think they look at things objectively. It's like but you don't. It's you gotta account for that. Your whole group has not been objective. Your whole the whole effort. All of those people can get caught up in a belief in an orthodoxy and start doing things in a religious manner, even though you don't have a God per se. And so it's frustrating to be like, okay, I have copy pasted 5 quotes from Einstein. Wow, just those that one copy paste probably 70 or 80 times in the last year, just in the last year. And it just doesn't get around to people enough. That it's like these are Einstein's quotes. Stop believing in constancy. But that said, I've been trying to get this one thing passed through for 15 years now, at the bare minimum. And finally, the one episode from what's his name? Somebody in a big, well watched perspective finally did an episode on it not being a what was the name of the guy who does science stuff? It's really well known science YouTuber, Veritasium. Veritasium did a video on the difficulty of measuring the one-way speed of light. Finally, I mean, and this is something I've been, I've got what, 2,000 views a week on Quora, 2,000 to 3,000 views a week on Quora on my answers, and and just I'm talking to people who are literally part of the physics establishment. I talk to them daily in groups that I'm in, and they're at like major establishments. But still, it's just the ability for people to deviate from what the crowd believes and believe their own eyes of what they're seeing right in front of them. It's amazing how people can't do that. It's weird. But it's, we've got the quotes. He says it, then you go and you read deeper and he explains it. And then you read, and if you keep investigating, you say, oh, this makes sense. It perfectly makes sense why constancy doesn't work. It can't work. It's irrational. It's, you can't do that. But the problem really is Minkowski's death. Minkowski died and fucked everything up, bastard. If he just taken better care of himself. Seriously though, that was the main problem. Early books. The very best book for understanding early models is, let me look over my library here. It's History of the Theory of Ether and Electricity by, what was his name? Hold on, let me look over there. I'll tell you. Yes. How can I not remember his name? Whitaker. Whitaker is a historian that he really actually understood what he was writing, and there's a bunch of other books that would go along with it. I've basically read a lot of papers and a lot of from a lot of the various books, but that one in particular can really give you the basic underpinning that if you read through that, you're going to understand
where they were coming from and how they got there, because he explains things in a way that makes sense because he understands. And there's so many. Here's the thing: when you start reading 19th century authors, when he was actually, I think he was 20th century, but when you start reading, stuff from 100 years ago and before, you start to realize that people today have been taught rote learning so much that they don't understand anything. They just memorize and regurgitate, and it's really pervasive. And it's like when I started first reading 19th century physicists, and I'm like, wow, this guy's a genius, and wow, this guy's and then every single one that I wrote that I read, I'm like, they were all geniuses. Absolutely every single one of them were geniuses. How does this make it? They all understand what they're saying instead of just puking out more figures like a computer. They're not just computers doing math. They actually understand the way things work. And I'm like, what happened to humanity? And I actually have a theory that it's probably the leaded gas that made us all dumb. There was a combination of World War I and II killing off a lot of, our best people. Because like a lot of times the best people, who really want to contribute to society are the first ones to sign up and the first ones to die. And then all you're left with is just the shit. And so war just keeps killing off the best of humanity over and over. And so I have this idea that you combine that with leaded gas, and then absolutely everybody since like 1900 forward has just gotten radically dumber. And so I think we're all idiots. And that's why we start rating them. You think they're all geniuses? They're probably like average. Yeah, it is an excellent book, and I recommend just trying to go cover to cover. I know it's thick, but as you start going through it, man, it really it lays things out. Matter of fact, I think I was reading specifically about vortex filaments in that. The thing is that I actually had the idea for vortex filaments before reading some of these older authors, and found out that they had come to the exact same conclusions, that vortex filaments were actually necessary for Kelvin's model for vortex atoms to work. And I'm like, what? Oh my God. Yeah. Okay, cool. That's amazing. So there's the information's all there. I mean, if you want to go full conspiracy theorist, maybe what it is that this makes it too easy to understand nuclear technology. Maybe that's what's going on. I don't know. I hope not, because I hope it's not easy to just like make a nuke in your living room. That's I don't want to cause that, but like waking everybody up. So it's like, hey, go look at the history, and then everybody starts just blowing themselves up and accidentally killing themselves with radiation because they're doing experiments and stuff. I hope that doesn't happen. But there's the information's there, but which is one of the reasons why I've been like focusing a lot on the interface of science and spirituality and looking at that, because it's not good enough to simply give everyone more energy. In other words, say we vastly change the energy availability for every human being, so therefore food's easy to create and space is easy to make and all of our machines are easy to run, and so there's just an abundance, a crazy shift in the amount of abundance in the world. Well, that's not going to help people who right now are extremely wealthy and dissatisfied. There's a fundamental problem with mental health that is critical to solving the problem of human suffering. And there are people who are like black holes. The more that they're given, the more that they require, and it turns in they collapse in on themselves and they just start sucking the life out of everything, and they're miserable. And I actually grew up around some people who basically, because of their wealth, because they were given too much too fast, they became extremely miserable and made everyone around them miserable. And so that was kind of a life lesson for me. It's like, wow. Yeah, so money can't buy you love, that's for sure. Running into that. And so understanding that there are these basic things about the human condition that have absolutely nothing to do with the availability. Now, it's the thing. The availability of resources is very, very important component of it. It is a lot of what we're fighting over. And so a good stopgap would be to dramatically change that. But it is not, it's definitely not the be all and end all. And so there's a driving us towards understanding who and what we are, and more about our existence as a spiritual entity. In other words, like even if you are an atheist, understanding that there is something you could call your spirit in the way of information, in the way of the way in which things play out, and all the things interacting with you, and all of the things that make you feel and make you want, and what makes you happy and what makes you sad, why you're happy. All of those things are part of what religion has been trying to deal with for many thousands of years, for very good reasons, because it is critical just as critical to the human condition, and more so than tool use and things like that. So that's part of why I find it really crucial to connect these things, because a lot of people have become much more nihilistic, much more. Whenever you become nihilistic, you become a short-term thinker. When you think there's nothing beyond, like, say, for instance, everybody thought that they were going to die tomorrow. Everybody would just they'd just go crazy. They just mess everything up. Because when you don't believe there's anything beyond a certain point, because you don't understand your connectedness to the universe, there can be this short-sightedness that automatically occurs. And so there's this deeply ingrained short-sightedness happening to humanity that is that goes along with the aspirituality. And so even if you are an atheist and don't want to believe in anything, you can at least see the utility in belief systems, in understanding humans from a spiritual perspective. And that is good enough to start. It really is. And so that's why this project that I've been working on for years to build this bridge between science and spirituality. That's one of the reasons why I was on Deepak's show, because he's been there, in one of my, chat groups for a long time. And basically I'm attempting to speak words of, about a model of physics that precisely matches, not precisely, but that at the large scale directly correlates with everything that he's been teaching people about spirituality and all these ancient ways of I suppose conceiving of reality that can lead to a more peaceful existence and a more enriched and satisfying experience of reality. So yeah, that's what I'm working for. That's what I'm working towards. I haven't looked at some of the other things here. Let's see, is this? Huh. All right. Well, it seems as though this is kind of winding down, and she's over there asleep on the couch. And I really appreciate you guys helping me out on my first stream here. I didn't expect to do anything, and actually my headache's a lot better now. I'm starting to feel a little bit better, but I think we've covered a lot of ground here. And next time I come on, I should definitely have my my full persona. I'm from the future. Actually, speaking of which, I really enjoy, though I don't completely agree with the way in which he presents specifically the quantum aspect of it. I love this video. We are from the future. I hope you guys have seen it. If you haven't seen it, you should watch it. You can just Google it. But I'm gonna go ahead and get the link here real quick, because it's just, I love this video. And it's just got a lot of hopefulness, I suppose, to it. And oops, I hit the wrong button there. I think that everybody should check it out as a neat little video. There we go. Your cat is connected to the universe and it doesn't even care. Cats are truly enlightened. You know, I've got this theory about cats. As long as we're going to start, I'd like to talk about things. Sometimes I get too serious. I want to get a little bit less serious, and just have fun with things. You know, play around with the universe. I kind of feel like, you know, the cats are capable of seeing the probes from the aliens. You know, they look right up in this. They're like, they just look at nothing. So they're looking at, they could see the electromagnetic spectrum. That's why for thousands of years, they thought they could see the spirit world, because they're watching the cloaked alien probes. Cats can see past them. The idea the cats are connected to the universe and don't care. Yeah. A lot of animals are. They're actually, you know, enjoying life in the moment, but there's something to be said about having an existence higher than an animal. I mean, you know, that's one of the things I've thought about before. It's like, well, you know, matter of fact, there's one of my favorite anime, not authors, but a producer he did Ghost in the Shell. And he did another one more recently called Ghost in the Shell Innocence. And it's about the idea of, it's like, well, you know, being an animal or being a doll or I mean, being an animal or a child, you know, you have this experience that's more pure and more beautiful. And, you know, and there's a lot of people have this idea that we're basically we've confused ourselves into this crappy experience. And if we just, you know, let go of all that stuff, that everything we find. And it's like, and yeah, there's kind of a point to living as an animal, that, you know, given the fruit of from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, you know, has given us suffering, is kind of the perspective you're sort of representing a little bit there. And in Ghost in the Shell Innocence, I felt like he was doing the same thing. He was like, you know, it's kind of a hopeless view, instead of believing that there's a transition that we go through. That we first see things and we have nothing but suffering because of this additional consciousness. And it's just a bunch of just crap. You know, it just doesn't really make things better. And I think that's true until we break through to it. There is another level of peace that can be had with a more well-rounded idea, because I think that people try to lower themselves to be at the animal level of consciousness all the time. Drink a few beers, you know, you can get there pretty easily, and not care. But there's something not the same as having a more transcendent peace with the universe that still has a lot more. Oh, it's like the difference between the courage of an old warrior and the courage of a young man just joining. You know, when you've taken the hurt and all of the and you still have the courage to overcome it, there is something categorically different to the courage of an old man to the stupid, you know, ignorance of a kid who thinks he's invulnerable. You know, it's not the same quality. And so there's a richness and complexity that to the courage of an older man versus that of a young idiot. And because it's so much harder to achieve. And that's kind of what the universe seems to be doing, is making these much more complex, more delicate structures. And so, yeah, the idea that animals are more enlightened. I don't know if they're more enlightened. They got it simpler. They do have it simpler and easier in a lot of ways. They probably don't have as exquisite of an experience. In other words, the complexity and depth of their experience is probably blunted a lot in both suffering and in nuance, at the very least. In other words, whenever you ask somebody, you know, you've been dumb. You if you've had a few drinks, especially if you had a few drinks too many, you've been stupid. You've been a child. And whenever asked, would you rather live that way? Only people who are really suffering a lot in a moment right now, in other words, in that part in their life, would really say yes to that. It's people, and those people end up, you know, using a lot of drugs and things like that to try to lower their consciousness to the point where they're not experiencing as much. But
But there, in the end, I think that that enlightenment is actually much more complexity, much more connectedness, much more. It's much more like that older courage instead of that younger courage. One is there's a it seems to be a very large difference. And the funny thing is, I'd say that difference is energetic in nature. In other words, just like the energy of some structures is higher than other structures. We're talking about especially potential energy, etc. And so there is a higher level of energy associated, in very physics terms, to a more complex mind. And if you can reach a level of harmony with nature and surroundings, that can be an experience that is more worth having, I suppose. And maybe that's part of what the universe has been doing this whole time, is making experiences that are more worth having. And sometimes that requires a little interim shitty area. It's a little area where things suck. And then you get to the next area where it's better. It's kind of like having a baby, you like all the suffering of having the baby. It's short-lived, dangerous, but then you get to the other side of it and you've got a baby. It's awesome. It's a new life experience.
Ironically, whiskers are for sensing waves. Yeah, I don't doubt it. I haven't actually. I probably run into that at some point, and it was so. Yeah, probably. That it ended up kind of lost. Knowledge equals good. Yes. Now the some of the interpretations of Gnosticism, which probably descends somewhat from Zoroastrianism. Zoroastrianism and Gnosticism are pretty contemporary, if I remember correctly. But according to our history, but I believe that both of them come from much earlier sources, even before the Babylonians and the Sumerians. And truth be told, I think probably about 10,000 or about 12,000 years ago, around 10,000 BC. But knowledge is good. I think so. I believe so. I believe that it can be. I just don't think that anything is 100% good or bad. I think it's always going to come with a price. It's always going to be a give and take. But with that, it's great talking to you guys. I really should get out of here and do another one of these at a time, so I don't wear everybody out. But thanks a lot for joining me. I really appreciate it. And also to you. Good night, guys.